Good day, everyone. My name is Chandana Gopal, and I'm a research director at IDC, a market research and advisory firm. I'm super excited to be here today to talk to you about Beyond BI, developing a bias for action, moving from static KPIs to action-based analytics. And to help me in this journey today, I have some wonderful panelists that will be joining. But before I introduce them, just a little bit of an introduction to myself. I have been an analyst at IDC for almost 10 years, and I've covered analytics and information management for most of that time. So with this, I look at research both from the buy side and the sell side, guiding vendors to figure out what they need in their products and helping buyers understand what they need to look for in technology as they contemplate purchasing analytics and other tools that can help them use data better in their daily lives. So with that said, I'd like to introduce you to a wonderful panel today. Let's start with Asher Feldman, who's from NBC Digital. Asher?
Hi, thanks, Chandana. My name is Asher Feldman. I'm the Director of Digital Operations and Analytics at NBC News Digital. You might be familiar with the three brands that umbrella encompasses: MSNBC, NBC News proper, and The Today Show. And my job is really to do exactly what you were just describing, Chandana, take data and move it beyond BI to actionable insight.
Thanks, Asher. That's wonderful. Next up is Niranjani Radhakrishnan from Region 1 Health.
Hi, it's so good to be here. My name is Niranjani Radhakrishnan, and I go by Jani Rad to everyone that knows me, and I'm the Director for Center for Information and Analytics at Regional 1 Health. We go by the CIA, and so if you hear me mention the CIA when I talk later, that's who I'm talking about, not the CIA that works for the federal government. And we essentially work within our Executive Operations Division, and we provide data to our C-suite leaders as well as to our clinical and non-clinical decision makers in our hospital healthcare system.
Welcome, Johnny. And last but not least is Sal Albornoz from the state of Utah. Sam?
Hi, thanks, Chandana. My name is Sam Albornoz. I work with the state of Utah as a business consultant and working on operational excellence across the state. And I most recently, the last year, have been working on a special project specifically around the COVID response for the state and the COVID task force. So,
excellent. Thank you all for joining. This is going to be a great discussion. Just reading your backgrounds and your stories, I'm super excited to bring this to the audience today. And welcome to the audience as well. So just to set the stage a little bit, what this discussion is about making enterprises more intelligent. And what do I mean by that? It's making sure enterprises can do three things. One is being able to learn from all data sources that they have, both internal and external, from within their enterprise and external to their enterprise, perhaps sourcing data from outside. The second is being able to synthesize that information. So you have all this data, you have to do something with it, because just having data doesn't make you intelligent. Being able to synthesize all that information. And the third, and almost the most important one, is to be able to deliver those insights to everybody within the organization. Because until people can action on those insights and actually do something, those are pretty much useless, right? So being able to create actionable insights and allowing everybody within the organization to have access to contextual data, allow them to use data at the point at which they need it, and make truly data-driven decisions that can then govern actions is what we're talking about. And all of these panelists have wonderful stories that talk about exactly how they've gone about doing that within their respective organizations. So I'll start with my first question, which talks about, if all your end users have to go to IT or have to go to a center of excellence, a BI center of excellence, for every little change or every little data point they need in order to make, if they have a new project or a new decision, that creates a bottleneck within the enterprise. So that becomes really hard to scale across the organization. So how have you, Asher and NBC, been able to make users, empower them to be more, have the ability to do a lot more by themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think over the course of the last 2 years, I've been at NBC News Digital since March of 2019, which seems like a lifetime ago now. The real concept that I kind of approached as my number one solve when I joined the organization was to take what seemed like 70 KPIs across the organization and really come to a mutual understanding across functions, business, editorial, video production, really the entire ecosystem of how we create the news on a day-to-day basis, take those disparate KPIs and come to an organizational understanding of a few key metrics that would be easily reported on, and any change in the business's operations, strategy, launching a new product, launching a new streaming service, as we did just about 18 months ago, launching new news brands, new news verticals, new ideas behind the scenes of the news organization and the news business, would be in the pursuit of simply incrementally building upon those few key metrics. Certainly, there are ins and outs and bits and pieces of each part of building a business like NBC News Digital that requires a little bit of nitty-gritty, granular detail and information. But the first goal and one of the key instruments of creating a data-driven organization was to centralize a few key metrics to let people know this is what we're in the pursuit of. And then every time we build something new, it's simply about ensuring that a tool like Domo is instilled and imbued with that visual presentation that easily communicates how that new piece of product news business has impacted that metric moving forward. And yes, again, like I'm saying, that bottleneck is not totally inescapable, because you do have to incrementally improve individuals' ability to report on their success. But from a broad perspective, it was very easy to say, well, you've improved this KPI, and everybody knows that that is the metric that we've all got our finger on the pulse of. And Domo was a great tool for doing just that, because of the ability to visualize and communicate some of this really essential data in a shareable, understandable, repeatable, and consistent way.
That's great. So it sounds like there was a lot of collaboration between all those, all your stakeholders and the team that built some of these assets, data assets for them, in determining what those KPIs were and, finding those really important metrics that you could then improve upon and track over a period of time.
That's exactly right. It was more like a product-oriented kind of thinking, working backward from the end users of the data, those being kind of like those news storytellers, to figure out exactly what was most meaningful to them. Which KPIs really did tell them that they were doing a good job, working backward from there across all functions of the organization to say, okay, let's center on these few metrics. We really can communicate that through Domo. And now when we build something new, you'll just see the incremental improvements on each one of those dashboards.
Yeah, that's a great point, because if you just start with what data you have, you often don't get to that point of being able to figure out exactly where you need to get to. You need to see where the puck is going, right, before you can start figuring out what data you need.
Exactly.
Great point. Yeah. And Johnny, I understand with the different the different users you have within your organization and their own comfort level with data, working with analytics and changing some of their their mindset. You have a story at the hospital as well about how you came about making everybody a lot more data driven within the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, data has been a huge part of our story in the past year. We use data literally every minute to drive our decisions at our healthcare system. And obviously this pandemic has just, rolled right in. But a big part of our story is honestly focusing on our relationship with IT. We work so closely with our IT team that people actually think that we are IT. But essentially, a big part of our story was getting people comfortable with the process. We work as a conduit to our IT team. And so when leaders have business and clinical questions that require data from our computer systems, we are actually essentially the first stop for many. So we help them think through their question and what sources that we may know of because of our familiarity now with our IT systems. And then we facilitate that conversation between the end users and IT to build out those reports. And so we include the end user, if possible, at every single stage to make sure that nothing gets lost in translation. And if all goes well, then, we get a test report, and then my team ensures that it's in that, that Domo friendly format. They work on the automation and the visualization from there. And, it sounds like a very clean process. There's obviously a lot more to it, as I'm sure my other folks on the panel here can speak to that as well. We're actually working on a large scale project right now to help streamline those processes even more, that our business analyst, Kelsey, is helping me lead. Because one of the biggest issues we have at our healthcare system is translating across clinical and non-clinical areas. So one question may have 5 different answers based on who you ask. So we're constantly working on those processes to make sure that we're getting our leaders the most accurate insight, whether that's, working with IT to figure out how we can make those IT reports from our EHRs, as efficient as possible, and working with our end users to say, what is it that you're actually trying to measure? And at every step of the way, we really try to include, IT and our end users and make sure that everyone has a seat at the table. Because at the end of the day, the tools are for the end user. So we want to make sure that they get what they want out of it.
Absolutely. That's a great story. And Sam, for someone that's representing the state of Utah, we've all had a year that we'll never forget in our lifetime. I know that for sure, with the pandemic. So how did you end up using data and analytics to help the state of Utah deal with the pandemic and all the ramifications with delivering care to the citizens and so on?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so last March, I was working at home at the very beginning of the pandemic and got a call that, hey, we need some help. There's a lot of data coming in from many different sources all over the state, and we need to put some dashboards together, and we need some help to really start funneling the data and building things out so that ultimately the governor and people that are making decisions and acting in this response would be able to quickly absorb that information coming in and know what to do when specific thresholds and levels were met. And so, I was part of a team that we went out and we built what we called, these playbooks. So we met with many different groups around the state that were dealing with the response and built out these playbooks, really focused closely on, okay, what is the goal here? What are we trying to accomplish? And really making sure that everyone right up front understood and we're on the same page of what the goal was. We talked about what are the problems that we see? What is one of the, some of the core problems that we can see would keep us from reaching that goal, and really identifying that in the playbook, identifying levers, and these measures that we could look at and say, okay, these are leading measures that will help us. And when we reach these thresholds, what are the levers we can pull? Whether those are positive or negative, what are we going to do? And really outlining that right up front before we built out any visualization. That was a huge help for us as we had to work quickly and had so many different streams of data. One of the other things that was really interesting looking back over the last year for the state, at least, is how quickly things have changed, right? Up front, we were really focused on getting data from the Department of Transportation. How is traffic coming in, leaving the state? We didn't know a lot about the virus. We looked at, a lot of modeling data around transmission and using proxies for that. And then we shifted quickly into, testing. We need to know about testing. We need to improve our throughput on testing. We looked at then into hospital capacity. That was a huge thing, and it's been like that, for a long time now, but how is this going to impact hospital capacity? Looked at contact tracing, investigations, and these things moved so quickly, and we were getting all these different streams. We had to make sure that we understood, what were the most important things that the governor and our task force needed to know and see every day in order to make good decisions and to communicate that out to the citizens of the state. So.
Yeah, no, that's, the days of having PDF reports that without data that changes dynamically, I think are well beyond, behind us now. We're never going to be able to go back to something like that before, because we know things change so rapidly, and you need to have that real-time insight into what's happened, so you can take decisions. And my guess is, Johnny, at at Regional One as well, I mean, obviously dealt with you were the front line of the pandemic. So for you as well, the data must have been changing so rapidly that you needed to adapt all the time to it, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as of just a couple weeks ago, I mean, we've been using data to drive our decisions throughout the pandemic. As of just a couple weeks ago, we've started using data to inform our vaccination process. We're tracking volume and timing and doses, so our vaccine coordinators can estimate how many doses of the vaccine that are needed. And, you know, as a hospital system, we're required to send metrics to our state and federal governments. And, you know, a data question that can be as simple as, you know, how many positive adults do you have that are on vents? There are, I mentioned, you know, for one question, there's 5 different answers. Even for a question like that, there's 5 different answers to that, depending on how you define it. So as the definitions were changing, you know, as we were learning more about COVID-19 and how it was spreading and how, you know, what symptoms are there and how people are diagnosed. You know, as more information was coming, the definitions were changing, you know, daily to weekly. I mean, we, as of just a couple days ago, actually, a data definition kind of changed again. So we are truly learning how to be adaptive very quickly. It's all about quick adaptation. It's about also being resilient. You know, when something you know, doesn't quite go as you planned, you know, when you have so many things automated, but then when there are definitions that quickly change, you kind of have to, you know, as proactive as we want to be, unfortunately, we do have to be reactive in this situation, and knowing that that's just the reality, because everyone is learning at the same pace globally of this pandemic. So as proactive as we want to be, we do kind of have to go back in and change definitions. And sometimes if something is missed, you know, my team is really good at kind of saying, okay, you know, there was a mistake here, or this one didn't go as planned, really quickly, because we don't have time to be frustrated. How can we move forward? What did we learn from this? How can we prevent this from happening again? And then how can we find opportunities to be proactive, given the information? So absolutely, it's been a lesson learned of, you know, how to be adaptive really quickly to changing definitions, both in the field of healthcare and also just, you know, conversationally, how we all talk about COVID-19.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you know, we've all had a year that's forced us to transform, you know, what we might have taken 3 to 5 years to do within a period of, you know, 12 to 18 months. And obviously the rate at which we had to do things has exponentially increased. So congratulations for keeping up with the way things changed for you rapidly within the hospital. And Asher, for you, from you know, from your perspective, you know, let's go back a little bit to, you know, helping the business or helping them figure out some of these decision points, and then working backwards to what data they needed. Talk to me a little bit about the process of, you know, having those discussions and having that, you know, helping them identify the right questions to ask, and how is that going, you know, evolving going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting kind of position to be in, working at an organization like NBC News that has 80 plus years of delivering trustworthy information. And people expect quite a bit from NBC News, MSNBC, and the Today Show as far as information, not least of which during the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, people are coming to our sites and our properties to answer the most important kinds of questions. So what I would say is that, especially amongst leadership, the goal has always been quite clear, right? Inform people, answer the questions, be a trustworthy news source, provide the insight and analysis and news that people are looking for. So it is kind of nice to have that situation where the ultimate goal of the organization is quite clear, and then that can be translated down into the day-to-day operations of the business. But yeah, it really was about figuring out what the best indicators of those kinds of positive news experiences were, in tandem with the people who actually make the news, who actually tell the stories, who actually deliver the information on air, online, through written editorial, opinion pieces, original video for digital properties across all of our platforms. It was about connecting the success, if you can call it that, of news with what that looked like on a digital scale. It's, you know, the classic thing of trying to connect digital metrics to actionable, tangible, physical, real world events. That's part and parcel to doing the job of delivering the news. You have to be able to translate something that's somewhat ethereal and maybe not very well defined, translate it into something that's very concrete and distinct. And that's actually what we were doing from a business operations perspective as well. What does success in the news look like? People come back, people want to learn more, people check in with NBC News all of the time. They're coming back for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes at a time. They're reading 6 articles in their visit. They're following us across our social platforms. There are all kinds of things that kind of move the needle toward indicating that we're doing our jobs well. And it was just about identifying the things that moved the needle most significantly to indicating that we were doing our jobs well, and specifically doing the job of reporting the news well, that we were then able to make very clear and well-supported recommendations to leadership, like the editorial team thinks, the business team thinks, the ad sales team thinks that these things really do speak to the success of the business and ultimately to delivering the news. So let's just center around those metrics. And that's exactly what we did.
Yeah, and there's actually a great question in the chat that adds to that as well. So I'm just going to ask you that. You know, do you track some of these visualizations and, you know, dashboards that you might have built to figure out, you know, what actions were taken and kind of see which are the ones that are most actionable and what types of visualizations are the most impactful for your users? And this was a question from Daniel, so I'm just asking it on his behalf.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been quite clear. We've played around with, we've A/B tested, even you could say, the style of our dashboards to see what really does make a daily difference on the way that people make their decisions. I mean, we're not necessarily ourselves news makers. We're taking the 50-50 call that many times news makers are trying to decide upon, like, should I write this story? Should I not write this story? Should I headline or title the story this way? Should I produce this video or not? And just give them that extra 1% of information to say yes or no to a question. And oftentimes that boils down to not just how many people watched this video or how many people read this story, but where did they read it? Like there's the second layer of information that we were always most interested in attacking. We're unpacking those KPIs. Once we can kind of settle on those KPIs, we unpack them and say, okay, now that we think unique visitors, for an example, is very important to us, now let's understand where those unique visitors are coming from. And let us see if we can visualize for our audience, those being the end users of the data, where can we make an impact? Where can we make a change? Where can we really move, again, to use the metaphor, move the needle to really make it clear that we're building something here. We're building a positive experience. It really was about just like taking that next level of detail deeper and blowing that out for the biggest audience possible.
That's great. And your answer was so perfect. It answered the next question by Dave Luna as well. So you gave an answer that answered a question in the future. So awesome. So Sam and Johnny, in your organizations, you probably had people that had a variety of skill levels or comfort levels with data, right? And given the pace at which things evolved, you don't have a lot of time to invest in, you know, long training sessions or, you know, long sending people off to go boot camp or workshops or whatever to get trained on new tools and technologies. So let me start with you, Johnny, and then go to Sam about how you upskilled or, you know, spread out the knowledge and the ability to work with these tools and data, especially to those that might have been hesitant or, you know, may just not have had the exposure to working in a data-driven culture before.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll answer that. And then I'll actually answer the person's question in the chat too, because it kind of gets to that also. I will say, you know, I don't know, to be honest, that there was one person at our hospital that said, you know, this is how, you know, we want to be a data-driven organization. I mean, our executive team had that vision, but there were also leaders on the ground who really knew that we wanted to use data to drive our organization to the fact where it's codified, you know, into our strategic plan. We want data to become a part of our culture. And as much as, you know, stories and narratives are important, if we can supplement them with data, that can take our stories even further. And so a big part of what we do to actually bring our clinical and non-clinical teams together is to show that I think to quote someone actually from a meeting we had yesterday, 80% of our data comes from 20% of our systems, and 20% of our systems are being used by both our clinical and non-clinical leaders. So if we can all see that we all have a common interest, which is to improve our data systems, and see that at the end of the day, it impacts all of us, then it's really easy to bring together everyone for one team. And to get to the idea too of skill level, absolutely, we have everyone from every single skill level and comfort level with technology, as you can imagine. And it's been a 3-year journey. When I first joined the organization and was kind of tasked with, get everyone, thirsty for data and analytics at this hospital, it was tough. I knew the environment that I was going into, and I think part of it was, doing some trainings. You're right. It definitely takes a lot of capacity and time to do trainings, but we've been doing them quarterly. And we kind of have a set training that we've designed where it's for every new user that hops onto Domo. We have a training, and then we also encourage and invite anybody who's an existing license holder to attend those trainings as well too. So that way they can continue to stay up to date with all of the things that are changing. Because as you mentioned, we are constantly adapting and improving Domo daily. And I actually love that you use the word evolve, because evolve is actually the framework that we adapted at our at the CIA, the Center for Information and Analytics. It's actually an acronym that we developed. I won't go through the whole acronym, but it essentially goes towards decision support and how we can really center our end user at the development of our tools. Yeah. So thinking about, what is the skill level that we are working with? What are some errors that we can anticipate? When somebody looks at this, what is the first thing that they might think of? And it's actually not the way we want them to think about something. If somebody uses this filter, are we actually showing them the information that we think that when they select that filter that it's going to show them? So we try to anticipate based on their skill level, their comfort level, and everything, using this framework called Evolve, how to make those tools even better. So I hope I answered your question. It was a little long-winded.
No, that's perfect. I love the fact that you built your acronym is Evolve as well, just because it means that's what it's never static, right? It's always going to change, and that's what you have to be prepared for. What about you, Sam? What did you find within your user community about their openness to using data, and if they were if somebody was not willing or able to change, how did you encourage them to come along the journey with you?
Yeah, so I think for us here at the state, we have a centralized technology center, and so the department here supports all of the executive branch agencies. We have over 28 or 29 different agencies that handle so many different aspects of government and public life, and so trying to, I think we're early on in our progression of this data-driven mentality. But I think we've seen over the last few years that I've been here, some big, taking some big steps. And one of those was really focusing on this idea that there's a specific skill set needed to be able to think through things like this. We have our subject matter experts at the agencies that handle things like, so we have workforce services and the health department and human services. They know what they know, but there's also this other side that they need help on to be able to understand, okay, how is what we're doing, how does that ultimately tie to the goal of our department? And how does that align with the goal of the governor? We're all in this together, even though we're, in different parts of the state and handling different types of things. How do we bring all that together? And so we put together a team and developed a process by which we could get people out there to help these agencies understand how to think this way, how to think about, okay, this is our goal, this is how it aligns, and then these are the things that are keeping us from reaching that. And then also another point, from the very beginning of any project or anything that they're doing, think about what are the things that we can measure. How can we measure whether we're moving the needle towards this or not? And those are discussions that never really happened before. And so we've been able to start getting into all these agencies and these different groups doing that, and then training them to do that. I think the next step then alongside that is how do we incorporate these tools that we have at our disposal like Domo to be able to facilitate the spreading of that information and those measures across, so that everyone can have visibility to see what I'm doing and individually, and how that impacts what we're doing collectively. And so like I said, we've seen a lot of big strides in the last few years, and we're continuing to move towards that. And I think Domo's helped us as a tool to be able to facilitate that by the interface that it has, and the different options that it gives you for a variety of different levels of skill to be able to get in there and to create visualizations, to dive deeper into specific visualizations. So yeah.
Yeah, sure. And there was one more question on, how do you build adoption? And based on my conversations, what we'll end up seeing is oftentimes identifying champions within the organization. So people that might be in a business area or a line of work that are really good at using data, identifying those evangelists and kind of saying, okay, you train them and they kind of train their group, or bring them along and spread the word, spread the message, and kind of get everyone excited about using data. That's often an approach that works. And the other one is, doing things like lunch and learns, doing things like, collaboration opportunities, incentivizing, how do you incentivize your people to collaborate more around data? So these are all approaches that I've seen that organizations tend to use, and just building that data awareness within their user group. So let me go back. There was one more question. Let's start with how do you distribute Domo content around your organizations? And I'm not sure if who wants to start, but let me just start with you, Asher. How do you the questioner asks, is it through email reports? Is it through the web app? Is it through mobile app? So on. What's the way they consume Domo?
Yeah, for the most part, people consume Domo at NBC News Digital through the web app. However, it actually kind of speaks to adoption. We email Domo reports to a much broader user base than those who actually use Domo on a daily basis. And oftentimes we'll include a little disclaimer when we update or improve a dashboard, like all of these charts are interactive if you click into the chart and request Domo access or sign up for a Domo account. And it's a nice way to spice up the feeling of wanting to be part of the Domo community amongst our user base. And it tends to work. It's about speaking to what's inside of the email reports often that really does engender that kind of engagement that we're looking for with that kind of data.
Great. What about Sam? How do your users consume reports or Domo, the information within Domo?
Yeah, so I think a couple different ways. I think there's a subset of users that will go to the web app, very on a schedule, because they're having to report out to Unified Command on, how are things going every single day or every other day. And then there's our a little bit higher level users that we are using the reporting tool. So on a schedule, either daily or weekly, we'll send out these reports, which I think triggers a lot of people to come back into the app and dig in a little bit deeper. And then we also are using alerts a lot to say, these are some of the thresholds that we've set, and we know that some lever needs to be pulled at these points. And if those points get to that level, then send an alert. And that way they don't have to necessarily be looking at data all the time, but they know that if something does happen that they need to take action on, they do get that alert. So.
Excellent. Johnny, anything to add to that?
I'll just keep it brief and say ditto. We definitely use a mix of the digital dashboards for people that have the interactive licenses, and for those who don't, that really just kind of want high level daily detailed information, then we'll send an email report. And then we also utilize the slideshows as well.
Sure, great. And another misconception, or oftentimes organizations think that the data-driven organizations can only be the new born in the cloud. The young organizations that don't have a legacy of data that's sitting in so, on-premises systems that cannot be accessed easily, or, takes forever to build integrations with, and so on. And none of your organizations are the kind that were born yesterday, right? I mean, you've been around for a while. So how do you build that access to some of these, data that might be sitting in systems of record that are, not cloud enabled or sitting in the cloud, right? So Asher, let me begin with you.
Yeah, I mean, I touched on it a little bit earlier with the amount of history that an organization like NBC News has. We're kind of in a really nice place as far as people who really care about the business and care about the image that we portray to the world. I actually spoke about this at last year's Domopalooza virtually, how to build a habit of data utilization amongst storytellers, the journalists, at a kind of traditional organization like NBC News is. And really it boiled down to, again, taking the high level operational and kind of broad goal of the business of doing the news and translating it back to those same people that produce the news in a way that they would recognize. And the way that they recognize is tell them a story. It's about visualization. I can't describe to you how many conversations we've had just about very simple, standardized visual language, definitional kind of approach to data visualization and data storytelling at NBC News Digital. It is, to my mind, the most important thing, because if you can't understand what you're looking at, then why look at it at all? That has been the driving force. And again, with hundreds of storytellers just sitting in front of their computers every day, if you can engage them with Domo data dashboards, you've done a pretty good job. And that's been the kind of overarching methodology of how we've taken a non-cloud or non-new tech organization and transitioned it to a place of much greater data maturity than just, let's say, a year ago pre-pandemic.
Yeah, I love that quote, and I'm going to steal it. It's like, if you don't understand why you want to look at it at all, right? If you don't know what it means, you shouldn't be looking at it, or you're just wasting your time on it. Great quote there. So Johnny, there's one thing that I saw in the background information about your organization, and that's really interesting to me. It's about using data in new ways. And some of this is about you finding new sources of revenue, or a new product line, or some way of monetizing something that you might have spent a lot of time and effort building. So we call this data monetization. You might call it something else, but I understand at Regional One you have a story around this. So can you talk a little bit about the opportunity that came about by using data?
Yes, absolutely. And just a pub too, we have a video session as well. So if people want even more detailed information, definitely check that out, and you'll hear all the different voices at Regional One Health. But basically, as I've kind of talked about, it's been a journey over the past 3 years, just making a sense of all of the data we have, all of the systems, bringing together the clinical and non-clinical leaders, everyone basically just joining forces to say, you know what, we have the potential to become a data-driven organization. And it was a lot of small wins, finding those champions, like you mentioned. And, we're still learning. I don't want to sit here and pretend that, we have everything figured out, but where we are now compared to 3 years ago is night and day. And what we've been able to accomplish in the past 3 years is essentially take these systems that, like what Asher mentioned, they're not systems that have been automated before. They're not, systems that can just be seamlessly integrated into cloud databases or anything like that. But we, first of all, found a way to extract data from them. That was the first win. Then we figured out, what are those metrics specific around healthcare organizations that really show if a healthcare organization is being successful from a metric standpoint? So we essentially, what used to just be pages and cards that were everything from financial metrics to employee turnover, patient satisfaction, length of stay, harm events, anything that you kind of think of when you think of a healthcare system. Over the past 3 years, we've transformed them into digital interactive dashboards that are rolled out all the way down to the manager level. So not only can a C-suite see the high level metrics to see, are we accomplishing the goals that we set for our fiscal year, But our managers, from a day-to-day perspective, can take a look at these metrics that a lot of them do change daily, some of them weekly, based on the system, and actually use that to manage. And we've seen, the utilization of Domo just skyrocket in the past 3 years. I think we started off with 10, 15, 20 licenses, and now we're at 200 active users and people always wanting more. So, with that, essentially, we saw the value. Our own organization saw the value of what Domo can bring to a healthcare organization, and that even at a healthcare system, you don't have to just use business operations and financial metrics. You can use clinical metrics in Domo and help you make clinical decisions. And there aren't a lot of places that do that. So we really felt like we were, leading the way in healthcare analytics here. And so what we did is we essentially, we optimize these over the past year to work with our leaders to make sure, again, centering it at the end user, is this giving you what you want? Is this actually helpful on a day-to-day? And what other things do you want to see on here? What would be helpful for you to do within the app? Some, actions that you can take to follow up on clinical decisions and following up with patient care. And so now we're very excited to say that we are putting this together into a suite of tools that we want to share with other healthcare organizations. We want it to be a part of your story too, because again, we've seen the value add at ours, and it's going to be in the App Store sometime in the year 2021, and we want to help other healthcare organizations bring Domo to you.
That is an awesome example of how you can take, a project that starts somewhere, lands up becoming, a driver for growth. I mean, that's a great example. So thank you for talking about that. There was one more question in the chat that I want to address is, how do you give awareness about what content is available for new users? So Sam, let me start with you. If you've made something new available, or something has changed and you need to let your user base know about it, how do you update them on maybe a new way to do something or a new KPI that's being tracked? What's your method for getting the word out?
So what we've done in the past, and we do this periodically because of, especially with the COVID response, things are changing. And like, I think Johnny mentioned it as well, that, these definitions are changing and where we're focusing on is changing. So the ability to send out an email quickly through the different groups that we've set up, that's what we utilize, and just putting together something that says, with some screenshots or with specific cards that say, this was what we were doing before and this is what we're doing now. And that helps us to be able to turn that around much more quickly than in the past. So
change management, that's how you manage change and make sure everyone's aware of the way things have evolved, or maybe something new is available.
Yeah, I mean, we also do, put banners or different things on the dashboards that we have.
Yeah.
To notify people to say, hey, this has changed or this is changing from this day moving forward. And you can dig in a little bit more if you need more information as to why that's the case.
Excellent. Johnny or Asher, anything that you want to add to what the way they manage it at the state?
Yeah, I can add, we also recently started using banners. I think the biggest way that we communicate changes is through our quarterly trainings. So we really use that as an opportunity to kind of talk about the enhancements that we've done to Domo. And that way we can also then walk people through then how to actually navigate through some of the optimization that we've done. And I think the other thing that we use for communicating is, our monthly managers meetings that we do. Yeah. So that way we can really just get to, as many people as possible. But I think we really focus on using those trainings as both information giving and also training.
Excellent. That's great. We're running. We're almost at the top of the time that we have here. But at the end of the day, what I see most often in building this data-driven culture is a lot of times, getting management, getting leadership really excited about what is possible, the art of the possible, right? So really getting your management excited, and sometimes a top-down approach is great if they are already inculcating and they are role modeling that behavior, oftentimes it's very easy to spread that around the organization. But if not, there's a little bit of education that needs to happen to make sure people understand how maybe before you were just, you can correlate and now you can find out the cause of something, and or you can predict something better for the future as opposed to just looking at past. So those are all ways of learning how to use data better. And I hope this discussion was useful to all our listeners, just because all of these are such great examples of how data can truly transform an organization. Thanks again for being here, and thank you to my wonderful panelists.